The scream split the rooftop before the music could swallow it, and glass rained like stars as a flute shattered near the rail. Elena said, "Play it again," and the voice note hissed from her phone, slick with spilled champagne. Marcus said, "It's out of context," but the clip kept looping, his words slicing clean. He said, "I made sure her demo never reached Noah," and the crowd pulled back as if the confession had teeth. Elena said, "You promised me," and wind drove cold across the string lights, making them tremble. Noah said, "Tell me that isn't you," and the city below flared with sirens that felt like applause for disaster. Priya said, "Stop, breathe," but the damage already had a shape. Marcus said, "I was protecting us," and Elena watched the lie try to stand up straight. She said, "No, you were feeding your hunger," and the phone light cut their faces into hard edges. He reached for her shoulder. She stepped away. The night held its breath, waiting to see who would break first. The hallway outside the rooftop hummed with the dull thunder of bass and pipes, and Elena walked until the noise thinned into a hum she could swallow. She pressed her palm to a cold wall, and felt her pulse try to outrun itself. Priya said he planned it, and the words tasted like rust. Elena said he called it protection, and breath steamed the metal door. Noah said, "I should have seen it," and his shoulders dropped as if guilt weighed more than air. Elena said, "He knows where to strike," and memories unspooled of nights spent building trust like scaffolding. Priya said, "You don't have to stand in the blast to prove you're loyal," and the hallway lights flickered. Elena said, "I will not be small for his comfort," and the sentence steadied her spine. Noah said, "Then let's be clear," and he stepped closer, careful with his eyes. She said, "I want the truth in daylight," and the handle under her fingers turned warm with resolve. The city street breathed damp heat as traffic smeared into red and white veins, and Elena stepped into the current without looking back. Noah said, "He envies the way people trust you," and the sentence landed with the weight of a decade. Priya said, "Jealousy eats what it loves," and her gaze tracked the rooftop edge above. Elena said, "He learned my map and drew traps on it," and a bus roared by like a held-back scream. A vendor shouted, and paper lanterns trembled, and the night felt crowded with listening doors. Noah said, "He wanted your song to die in silence," and the words cut new space between them. Elena said, "Then I will sing louder," and the crosswalk blinked to walk like an omen. Priya said, "Take proof, not vengeance," and the advice stung because it was right. Elena said, "I choose light," and the world seemed to tilt toward morning even though it was still midnight. They found brief shelter under a deli awning where the hum of refrigerators made a low mechanical lullaby, and the rain stitched silver bars beyond the curb. Elena said, "He watched me build and called it his safety net," and the sentence balanced like glass. Noah said, "He fears being second," and his voice softened into something honest. Priya said, "Fear is loud when it is empty," and she wiped water from her glasses with the corner of her sleeve. Elena said, "He will come with apologies sharpened to cut," and the awning creaked under a wind that smelled of metal. A siren flexed past and left a quiet that felt newly drawn. Noah said, "What do you need from me?" and the question waited like open hands. Elena said, "Stand where truth stands," and the choice tasted clean. Priya said, "Then we hold the line," and the three of them faced the street as if it were a stage where morning would audition. When the storm eased to a whisper, Elena walked back to the building's lobby and stared at her reflection in the elevator doors until it blinked. She said, "He chose jealousy," and the admission loosened something tight around her lungs. Noah said, "You choose yourself," and the lobby's marble sent their voices upward like small prayers. Priya said, "Document everything," and the plan took form like scaffolding rising from fog. Elena said, "Tomorrow, I open the windows and let the city hear," and the phrase tasted like copper and sunrise. The doorman nodded without asking questions, kindness wrapped in silence. Noah said, "We won't let you stand alone," and the promise rang clean. Elena pressed the elevator button and felt the click like a heartbeat. She said, "Then let him hear me coming," and the doors yawned open like a prologue. The park still smelled of wet leaves when Elena traced her fingers over the worn bench where summers had lived. She said, "This is where loyalty began," and memory answered with laughter caught in sunbeams. Marcus had once said, "No one will ever break us," and the echo stung now. Priya said, "You were children then," and her eyes carried both warmth and warning. Noah said even promises made at 15 can cut at 26, and the wind tugged at his shirt. Elena remembered running through sprinklers, voices hoarse with joy, friendship folded into every step. She said, "I thought forever meant unshakable," and her breath shook. Priya said forever changes shape, and the truth felt heavier than stone. Elena said, "Then why does it still hurt the same?" and the silence answered like a bruise. They walked along the lake's edge where ducks carved ripples into silver glass, and Elena's voice carried across the water. She said, "He told me secrets here," and the admission pulled her inward. Noah said, "Secrets are currency to him," and his face held disappointment. Priya said, "Trust doesn't die in silence, it dies in betrayal," and the words floated heavy. Elena remembered the night. Marcus swore never to lie, stars spinning above them like promises etched into sky. She said, "I held those words as sacred," and the weight bent her shoulders. Noah said sacred words can be broken, and the lake mirrored his sorrow. Priya said, "So build a new altar for yourself," and the water shimmered as if agreeing. They found an old swing set rusted with age, and Elena brushed her hand over the chains as if to summon echoes. She said, "He pushed me higher, said I would touch the sky," and her smile cracked. Noah said, "He envied the way you flew," and his tone was steady but sad. Priya said, "Envy corrodes joy," and her glasses caught a dim streetlight. Elena remembered nights of racing home, shoes muddy, laughter stitched into every step. She said, "We promised the world could never divide us," and her throat tightened. Noah said, "Promises spoken in joy are tested in shadows," and the swing creaked in the quiet. Priya said, "And sometimes they fail," and Elena let the chain slip from her grip. Near the corner cafe where they once split milkshakes, Elena paused, hand pressed to the cold window. She said, "This booth was ours," and her breath fogged the glass. Noah said, "He claimed it as proof of your bond," and the phrase made her wince. Priya said, "And now it is proof of how far he fell," and the rain outside streaked a reflection. Elena remembered sticky laughter, Marcus stealing fries, promises drawn in ketchup hearts. She said, "I believed every gesture," and her voice trembled. Noah said, "You believed because you loved," and the truth carried weight. Priya said, "That love was real, even if his loyalty was not," and Elena's hand slipped down the glass like surrender. They returned to the rooftop's edge, though the party was gone. Only the wind and faint glow of scattered lights remained. Elena said, "This is where it broke," and silence agreed. Noah said, "This is also where you rise," and his words steadied the air. Priya said, "Endings are also beginnings," and her tone was soft but sure. Elena looked over the city, remembering how Marcus once said, "We own the skyline," and the memory cut. She said, "He tried to steal my voice," and her chest burned. Noah said, "But he cannot take your song," and the wind lifted his words. Priya said, "Sing it louder," and Elena inhaled until her ribs ached. She said, "Tomorrow begins with me," and the city lights flickered like an answer. The morning air smelled of asphalt and coffee as Elena spotted Marcus across the plaza, his smile practiced like theater lights. She said, "You avoided my calls," and her tone carved through the bustle. Marcus said, "I've been busy," but his eyes darted. Noah said, "Busy burying truths," and his fists clenched at his sides. Priya said, "Don't give him a stage," but her warning arrived too late. Marcus stepped closer, voice syruped with charm. He said, "We're still the same, aren't we?" and the words soured instantly. Elena said, "No, you've changed the script," and the pigeons scattered like punctuation. Marcus said, "You're imagining shadows," and his grin faltered. Elena said, "I see more clearly now," and silence circled like a crowd with no face. They sat on the library steps where whispers of students swirled around them, and Elena's voice cracked against marble. She said, "He wore trust like armor," and the echo felt hollow. Noah said, "Armor hides wounds," and his gaze fixed on his shoes. Priya said, "Or hides weapons," and her words stung sharper. Elena remembered lending Marcus her notes, his gratitude a mask for ambition. She said, "He used my work to climb, and the admission tasted bitter." Noah said, "And left you in the shadows," and his voice burned with guilt for not stopping it. Priya said, "Shadows reveal shape," and the sentence pressed weight onto them. Elena said, "Then I will show his shape to the world," and the vow hardened. The cafe window rattled under a passing truck as Elena stirred her untouched coffee. She said, "He claimed silence was loyalty," and her spoon clinked like irony. Noah said, "Silence is a blade when wielded," and his tone chilled. Priya said, "He cut without lifting a hand," and her eyes narrowed. Elena remembered the night Marcus ignored her performance, whispering instead to strangers. She said, "He made me invisible," and her lips trembled. Noah said, "But you shone brighter even in his shade," and the compliment softened nothing. Priya said, "He cannot unmake what you are," and Elena's breath steadied. She said, "Then I will not let him write my silence," and the table seemed to anchor her resolve. The rehearsal room smelled of dust and strings as Elena tuned her guitar, the notes breaking unevenly. She said, "This was my safe place," and her hands trembled. Noah said, "He poisoned it with envy," and his shoulders sagged. Priya said, "Envy cannot play a true note," and her voice echoed. Elena remembered Marcus leaning against the wall, eyes hungry as she performed. She said, "He wanted to own my song," and bitterness tightened her throat. Noah said, "But he never earned it," and his voice rang steady. Priya said, "Play it now for you," and Elena strummed a fragile chord that lingered. She said, "This is mine again," and the sound carried strength. Rain slicked the alley where voices carried thin as smoke, and Elena stopped at the graffiti wall. She said, "He whispered, 'Lies here,' and the neon glow framed her face." Noah said, "Lies burn faster than truth," and his fists clenched. Priya said, "But ashes remain," and her tone was low. Elena remembered Marcus leaning against this wall, words dressed as comfort, but forged as betrayal. She said, "He carved doubt into my skin," and her breath hitched. Noah said, "Then carve strength now," and his eyes shone. Priya said, "Truth paints over lies," and the spray paint hiss echoed memory. Elena said, "I will paint my own story," and her voice carried like thunder against brick. The gallery lights hummed low as Elena froze before the mural, her song lyrics painted bold in Marcus's handwriting. She said, "He stole my words," and her chest tightened. Noah said, "He wanted the world to think they were his," and his voice echoed in the sterile air. Priya said, "Art without truth is theft," and her glasses reflected the mural's glow. Elena remembered nights scribbling lines on napkins, Marcus nodding as if they belonged to him already. She said, "Every line was my heartbeat," and her palms shook. Marcus entered, voice smooth as glass, and said, "We made this together." Elena said, "You made it a lie," and the silence turned sharp. Reporters crowded the gallery entrance, flashes bursting like lightning. Elena said, "He made betrayal public," and the weight of exposure dug deep. Noah said, "Truth must be louder than lies," and he stepped forward shielding her. Priya said, "Don't let them frame you as the villain," and her words carried urgency. Marcus raised his hand to the cameras, smiling wide. He said, "This is my creation," and the lie tasted poisonous. Elena said, "He performs betrayal as art," and anger steadied her. The crowd's questions fired, but her silence became strength, her eyes fixed on the one who broke her. Later, in the quiet of the stairwell, Priya's voice trembled. She said, "He's turning everyone's eyes against you," and her hand gripped the rail. Elena said, "Then I will not blink," and her jaw tightened. Noah said, "You don't have to carry this alone," and his voice carried weight. Elena said, "He wants me cornered, but I will stand center," and her breath burned with resolve. Priya said, "Every mask he wears is cracking," and she pushed her glasses up. Elena said, "I will be the mirror that breaks him," and her reflection shimmered in the stairwell glass. The silence of the hall thickened into promise. At the riverside stage where Elena once performed, Marcus stood under the spotlight rehearsing words that weren't his. Elena whispered, "This was my sanctuary," and the ache spread like wildfire. "Noah," said, "he claims your voice because he fears his own," and his eyes never left the stage. Priya said, "Let them see the real owner," and her tone sharpened. Elena stepped forward, heart racing, and said, "Sing stolen notes and they will turn to dust." Marcus said, "You think you can silence me?" And the crowd stirred in anticipation. Elena said, "No, I will drown you in truth," and the night bristled with storm. When the performance ended, silence roared heavier than applause. Elena stood at the center, heart still pounding, while Marcus's mask faltered under the weight of truth. She said, "Theft cannot survive exposure," and her voice rang steady. Noah said, "You broke his stage," and his words carried strength. Priya said, "Now he faces the light," and her glasses glimmered. Marcus muttered, "You will regret this," but the threat bent under its own weakness. Elena said, "I regret nothing except trusting you," and the crowd's stillness spoke louder than their voices. The night closed heavy, but it was Elena's strength that filled the air. The storm broke over the rooftop as Elena faced Marcus beneath trembling string lights, rain slicing their silence. She said, "You betrayed the bond we built," and her voice struck sharper than thunder. Marcus said, "You left me no choice," his eyes wild with fear and pride. Noah said, "You chose envy," and the rain plastered his shirt to his chest. Priya said, "This is not protection, it's destruction," and her tone cracked the air. Marcus stepped closer, fists trembling, and said, "I wanted what was mine." Elena said, "Nothing was ever yours to steal," and her words burned against the storm. Lightning lit their faces like a confession carved into sky, and the night roared with their clash. Marcus's voice cracked as he shouted above the storm, "I deserve the light they gave you," and the words split the night. Elena said, "You deserved loyalty, not jealousy," and her fists shook at her sides. Noah said, "Truth never needed theft," his tone cutting. Priya said, "You wear betrayal like armor," and her eyes glimmered through rain. Marcus said, "I carried your secrets, and you shined while I vanished," and his rage trembled. Elena said, "You vanished because you chose darkness," and thunder rolled after her words. The rooftop felt like a battlefield carved by emotion, every drop of rain marking their war. Elena's voice rose against the rain, "You were my brother in spirit," and you shattered it for applause, and her tears blended with water. Marcus said, "Applause is survival," and his breath came ragged. Noah said, "Survival at the cost of love is death," and his jaw set. Priya said, "He cannot see beyond his hunger," her voice breaking. Elena stepped closer, hand trembling, and said, "I gave you everything," and the truth split her chest. Marcus said, "And I wanted more," and his words cracked like glass underfoot. The storm's roar answered their agony, and the night swallowed their cries like an endless well. Lightning cracked as Noah stepped between them, voice shaking but firm. "You can't erase her truth, Marcus." Marcus shoved him, shouting, "She stole my future." Priya said, "Your wounds are not her burden," and she reached to steady Elena. Elena said, "You twisted loyalty into a weapon," and her anger steadied her frame. Marcus's laugh was hollow. "Without me, you are nothing," but his voice trembled. Elena said, "Without you, I am finally free," and the storm paused in eerie silence. Every eye fixed on her as the skyline burned with lightning, and Marcus's mask began to fracture. The storm's climax shattered in a final roar as Elena stood over Marcus, whose shoulders sagged beneath defeat. She said, "This is the end of your lies," and her voice cut through thunder. Marcus muttered, "You will regret this," but his eyes betrayed fear. Noah said, regret is yours to carry, and his tone grounded. Priya said, your jealousy built your ruin, and her words pierced deep. Elena raised her chin and said, I claim back what you tried to steal, and her strength lit the night. The city below roared with sirens and rain, bearing witness to their storm-born reckoning. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that mirrored broken string lights across the rooftop. Elena whispered, the friendship is gone, and her voice trembled but held firm. Noah said, but you're still here, and his words steadied the silence. Priya said, what's shattered can't be rebuilt the same, and her tone carried sorrow. Marcus stood hunched near the edge, soaked and defeated, his voice cracking, I only wanted to be seen. Elena said, you were seen, but you chose envy over love, and her words struck like truth's final hammer. The skyline flickered, and the world seemed to exhale as the storm ended. Inside the quiet loft, the city's hum muffled by glass, Elena pressed her palms to the window. She said, I gave everything to trust, and her breath fogged the pain. Noah said, trust isn't weakness, and his reflection hovered beside hers. Priya said, but it cost you scars, and her voice softened. Elena turned, eyes bright with grief, and said, I lost him, but I also lost myself. Noah said, then find the self he couldn't break, and his tone carried weight. Priya said, scars don't erase, they shape, and the silence thickened like warmth. Elena whispered, then I will not hide mine, and resolve lit her eyes. The next morning, Elena walked the riverbank where mist curled low, her footsteps echoing. She said, he thought betrayal would end me, and her words mixed with fog. Noah said, but here you are, and his smile faintly curved. Priya said, strength doesn't roar, it walks quietly, and her tone calmed the dawn. Elena remembered childhood laughter with Marcus, now soured by lies. She said, memories cut deeper than wounds, and her breath shook. Noah said, then let them scar into wisdom, and the mist parted with sunlight. Priya said, you are no longer defined by his shadow, and Elena nodded, whispering, I rise. At the small cafe, warmth of fresh bread and coffee filled the air, laughter of strangers rising. Elena said, I once shared these mornings with him, and her tone cracked. Noah said, now, share them with yourself, and he smiled gently. Priya said, and with those who deserve it, and her eyes softened. Elena sipped coffee, steam curling like renewal, and said, this tastes like freedom. Noah said, freedom is earned, and the phrase hung steady. Priya said, and you've paid the price, and the clatter of cups punctuated her truth. Elena said, then let this be my beginning, and her shoulders lifted lighter. That evening, Elena returned to the rooftop alone. The city spread endless beneath. She whispered, I buried my trust here, but I plant my strength, and her voice carried on the wind. Memories clung like echoes of laughter and betrayal. She said, he chose jealousy, I choose survival, and the skyline burned orange with sunset. The silence didn't sting this time, it wrapped like armor. Elena lifted her face to the fading light, her chest rising steady, and said, this scar is my crown. The night descended slow, but her strength rose faster, unshakable, undeniable. The city pulsed beneath Elena as she walked across the bridge, wind tugging at her coat. She said, I lost my best friend, but I found my strength, and her voice echoed. Noah said, strength isn't borrowed, it's built, and his eyes softened. Priya said, you carry scars, but they make you real. And her hand brushed Elena's arm. The night hummed with car horns, but their words were louder than noise. Elena said, he can no longer define me, and her steps grew firmer. They paused by the riverside, where neon painted ripples across the water. Elena whispered, I gave him every part of me, and the weight pressed her voice. Noah said, and he turned it into a weapon, his jaw sharp. Priya said, but he cannot touch who you are now, and her tone carried light. Elena said, then let him drown in his own envy, and the river shimmered as if nodding. In the square, silence met them where crowds had once cheered Marcus. Elena said, "His applause is gone," and her words cut the emptiness. Noah, said Truth, "doesn't need applause," his tone steady. Priya said, "It needs memory," and her eyes gleamed behind her glasses. Elena closed her fists and said, "Let the memory of betrayal sharpen me," and her spine straightened like steel. The apartment glowed warm as Elena sat with Noah and Priya, coffee steam curling between them. She said, "You stood when he left me," and her voice softened. Noah said, "We never leave truth behind," and his eyes warmed. Priya said, "We carry it forward," and her smile faintly curved. Elena said, "Then I am not broken, I am rebuilt," and her words felt new, steady. On the rooftop one last time, Elena faced the horizon, string lights swaying faintly in night wind. She whispered, "He didn't just betray me. He betrayed every version of us we could have been," and her voice scarred the silence. Noah placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, while Priya's eyes glimmered with quiet pride. Elena said, "This scar is not weakness, it is my crown," and the skyline burned bright, carrying her truth into forever.